So the heads of these watchdogs are all totally bent. They are handpicked by the banksters, and none of them will touch the Epstein money laundering operation. So that money laundering, the Epstein ring, was used to cover up the kingpins of the LIBOR manipulation.
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report here. Thank you so much for tuning in. That was the voice of Mark Anthony Taylor, and this is part 2 of my interview with Mark about banksters, wetworks, and PEDO networks. It's pretty darn sick how it's all tied together. And friends, before we begin this interview, just a quick word about this interview's sponsor. Friends, the right to arm and defend yourself is more important than ever. You know it, and I know it. And you know what? The demonic D's know it too. And you can show your support for the Second Amendment with the Second Amendment coin. This Second Amendment coin normally retails for $39.99, but I've partnered with supportthesecond.com to give away this coin to my audience for free. All you need to pay for is the $9.95 shipping. This limited edition coin is engraved with pro Second Amendment quotes and logos. It's really cool, and it would make a perfect gift for a patriotic friend or family member. And you can add this coin to your collection for free. All you need to cover is the $9.95 shipping and handling. Go to supportthesecond.com or click the link which I'll provide below to order yours today.
Okay, so you have this guy, William Schmidt, Chief Risk Optimization Officer at Deutsche Bank. He writes a letter just before he's apparently suicided, and the newspapers just aren't interested in finding out what's in that letter. And in fact, the coroner, I think this guy was living in London, it was a British coroner, she kept it secret what was in this letter as a result of influence from Deutsche Bank's lawyers. So Deutsche Bank quashed the contents of that letter. That letter was addressed to Anshu Jain, and the note is below. Anshu, you are so good to me, and I have repaid you with carelessness. I betrayed your trust and hid my horrible nature from you. Can't even begin to fathom the damage I've done. Now, this guy was absolutely in fear of being prosecuted for LIBOR manipulation. That was never mentioned in the coroner's inquest as a result of lobbying from Deutsche Bank. This letter was never mentioned. It was covered up.
So with Schmidt out of the way, then the LIBOR investigation, in regards to him at least, also goes away. How convenient.
So it all goes away with the death of these people that can link it to Jane.
So that email to Anshu, supposedly from Schmidt, if we're to believe that he actually wrote that, how convenient, right? How convenient. He's basically taking the blame for everything and implying that he betrayed the trust of Anshu by doing all of this LIBOR rigging, etc., without the knowledge of the CEO, without the knowledge of Anshu? I mean, is that what we're actually to believe? Again, how convenient. Suicided what? Just a couple days later?
I'm going to remind you of something I said in my previous interview to you. So you've got this guy, Felix Hooffield, who's the head of BaFin, has Deutsche Bank investigated for, well, he's for gold rigging in 2014. 48 hours after Jane received litigation from me for gold rigging, Felix cancels BaFin's investigation. Well, we now know that Deutsche Bank was spoofing the bullion, wasn't it? which means that BaFin's investigation was totally superficial. And by quashing that investigation, he covered up any kind of further scrutiny that would have exposed the spoofing. So he should be wanted by Interpol. The FBI should be asking for his arrest to find out why BaFin didn't do its job. And he's the person who got BaFin off, who got Jane off for LIBOR manipulation. So how far can you trust him? And he's the head of BaFin. And you know who they picked to investigate Jess Staley for laundering Epstein's money to JP Morgan?
Who?
Andrew Bailey of the FCA. The FCA, according to internet review sites, has a 99% disapproval rating. The FCA takes 1 month to answer each email. So there's no way on earth the FCA is going to find against Jess Staley of Barclays for money laundering for the Epsteins. And Staley, as we know, was blackmailing Parliament to get him the job at Barclays using Epstein's materials. That was confirmed in the FOIAs that I submitted that you can see in our previous videos. So the heads of these watchdogs are all totally bent. They are handpicked by the banksters, and none of them will touch the Epstein money laundering operation. So that money laundering, the Epstein ring, was used to cover up the kingpins of the LIBOR manipulation. And the people in England with the most power to stop this do nothing. So I'm just going to show another slide here. Okay, this is something I've put out at Twitter. Nobody is suing me for libel for putting this out. This has gone to Parliament. So I'm exposing Bob Neal, head of the Justice Select Committee, with oversight over the British judiciary, because Parliament is sovereign in the UK, has more authority than the judiciary. He knew in 2016 that Lord Chief Justice Burnett had covered up Deutsche Bank's rigging frauds. He had the evidence before him. He had the evidence that Deutsche Bank's audits were fake. He did absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Even in 2018, when the CFT fines Deutsche Bank, he still does nothing and refuses to do anything. So the heads of all of these political institutions, the heads of all the judiciary, are in on this, protecting Jane. And as they protect Jane, they make sure that the blame falls on someone else, Trump. So if Trump is impeached based on these scurrilous accusations of the death of Bauer, then the likes of the Lord Chief Justice, as you see in the top right, are central to the cover-up, central to the wrongful impeachment of the President of the United States.
Let me ask you something real quickly, because you lost me just there for a second. Well, first of all, so the man on the left is Bob Neal, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and the man on the right is Lord Chief Justice Burnett, correct?
Sir Ian Burnett, yeah.
Okay, let me just say, Sir Ian Burnett does not look like a pedophile. I just want to get that out there, friends. That man on the right, he doesn't look like a pedophile at all. God, I can't even joke about this stuff because they're all tied in to pedophilia, friends.
Okay, so you've got Sir Terence Etherton, says of Burnett, it appears that the only club of which our new Lord Chief Justice is or has been a member of is the Pizza Express Club. Pizza Express is exactly the wording Prince Andrew used when he pretended he wasn't diddling one of Epstein's women, Epstein's girls.
All right, so my instincts seem to be correct. No, I joked about that because Burnett looks a lot like Ted Heath. They all look like they're morally bankrupt and physically very unhealthy, and generally I think evil things manifest in the physical form, in their faces, in their big fat bodies. These people are truly demons manifested as human beings, in my view. One thing I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the potential impeachment of Donald Trump based on one of these dead bankers. I haven't heard anything about that in the United States. I don't think the Democrats are necessarily astute enough, nor would they want to bring this up because it would be such a can of worms. So what were you driving at as it pertains to an impeachment of Trump based on some of this stuff?
Okay, so you can see for yourself here. You just type Michael Bauer's Russian Mafia. Nothing is linking to Jane. There's no mention here of Jane. But what you see is Trump. So, Daily Beast, alleged Russian mobsters in Trump's world orbit.
Okay.
Trump and the Russian Mafia.
So it's more
So,
Russiagate nonsense, trying to tie Russian
yeah,
mobs to
exactly so.
Deep state nonsense. Every single speck of it. I've said this a million times. Do you think if these people had the goods on Trump being a pedophile, do you think if they had pictures of him with children or underage women, do you think for a second that stuff wouldn't be public? I mean, they've tried everything else, including the bathroom sink.
Yeah,
It hasn't worked.
They only got interested in Michael Bowers because of his connections to Trump. So if he hadn't have been involved with Trump, we wouldn't know about him. Mm-hmm. So I've been reading articles today that have revealed key information about the death of these bankers. More has come out as of late, but they're all trying to spin it onto Trump. And there is the most threadbare connections, whereas Jane does not get a mention. So Jane appears to be totally immune to civil litigation and totally immune to criminal investigation. And he's obviously a man who deserves suspicion. No. If you look at John Crine and Christian Saving, they are facing litigation in that Esther Sellers lawsuit. So obviously Anshu Jain has more power than the other bankers in Deutsche Bank. Obviously more power.
But I mean, look, if you look at the top of J.P. Morgan, Jamie Dimon is untouchable. So we might see a limited hangout of some traders at the J.P. Morgan Precious Metals desk, but we're not ever going to see perp walks of these top people, of these CEOs. It's just never going to happen. I wish it would happen, but these corporations, these people at the head of these corporations, they are the shadow government. They comprise the shadow government, right? These are people that are part of this CFR, Trilateral Commission, Club of Rome, Bilderberg Group, Harryhausen Society. These are the underlings to those overlords. Hey, will you do me a favor before we wrap this up? And you can comment on that, but if you hit your back button a couple of times, you had something up there about Ted Heath. And I would really like to read that right there.
Okay, this is Jane Coleman's Reigns list.
Let me read this because I despise Ted Heath. He's a monster in human form, just like Jimmy Savile. He was the former prime minister, friends. Now, think of this. This is a man that would get one-on-ones with the Queen of England, sit-downs. If you haven't seen that Netflix show called The Crown, Ted Heath is portrayed as sort of a bumbling do-gooder with a heart of gold, essentially. Anyway, former Prime Minister Ted Heath, homosexual but not exclusively where children are concerned, has been mentioned by at least 3 satanic ritual abuse survivors, none of whom know each other. Several have described long fingernails. I'm told that he wore false claws added to his nails, which he clawed his child victims with. He died in 2005, and only later was it revealed that he was involved in a cult where allegedly as many as, I think, 16 children, Mark, were murdered. So these are the people that rule us, friends. What we've discussed here is just horrifying, but it is the reality, and it is the reality that is hidden from us every single day by the mainstream Mockingbird media, which is also a part of this empire that rules us, this evil satanic empire that rules us.
Yes, so I think your audience is in a position to demand key investigations of the people most likely responsible for the death of the banksters. They know who, they know why, and they know who exactly is covering it up. So we're going to have to act on this at some time. We don't want to go to our graves having done nothing but talk about it.
But it's tough, man, because you tried to take these people on in the courts, and the courts are rigged. So it's pretty hard to get justice in a rigged system where the shadow government controls so many of the courts, so many of the judges.
Their problem is that people are getting very, very angry, and they know that these systems are rigged. And in the age of the internet, they can no longer hide their crimes. The internet was meant to be a system for them to monitor us. It is much more highly damaging against them.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and I will make this last point, which I've made repeatedly. If you guys want to see how rigged the game is, Just use Google to search SGT report, and then use Bing to search the exact same thing, SGT report. The results are completely different, and that's because Google is part of this shadow government, and they're trying to do a modern-day book burning to bury all of this stuff so that researchers don't have access to the information you just heard conveyed in this interview from Mark Anthony Taylor. Well, let me just ask you this before we part ways. In your view, do you think the Rothschilds still sit pretty much at the top of this whole thing, or are they just one of maybe 13 families that control everything? What's your view on that?
I believe there are only two main families.
The Passeurs? Is that one of them?
The first family is the Rothschilds that everyone knows. The second family, hardly anyone knows about them. They are the Sassoons. They founded their money by the opium trade. If you want to know who was running the British opium trade in the 19th century, it was the Sassoons. They were running the opium trade for about 75 years, and at their peak, some say they had 100 million drug addicts paying into their coffers. So they must have made the equivalent of billions in their time, or trillions. They married into the Rothschild family, but I believe they could be the richer half. If you compound that wealth over 150 years or so, that puts their money in the tens or hundreds of trillions.
Well, I know that for a fact. You know, I did a video called Rothschild's Trillions Quantified, and just using the public information and the braggery from Jacob Rothschild himself when he claimed he was worth, and I'm going off memory here, let's say it was 100 million, I don't recall, but going off of the information he provided, just that one arm of that banking family with compound interest, not front-running markets or rigging or doing any of the stuff we know they do, just with simple compound interest, I think at 6%, that wealth he bragged about then is worth 240 trillion today at 6%. And the numbers are staggering if you use 8%, 9%, 10%. So these people are worth trillions, and yet we're told the richest man in the world is Jeff Bezos.
Yes,
That's
ridiculous.
the matrix in which we live, friends. That is the matrix in which we live. Jeff Bezos, one generation wealth. Jeff Bezos is the richest man in the world. Give me a break. I've said that several times in this interview, but give me a frickin' break.
I think Bezos isn't even in, I don't think he's even tier 2. I mean, he's probably at the level of your average Bilderberger. I think at level 2, it's not so much a question of money. So I think Mandelson and Lynn Forrester de Rothschild were definitely level 2 agents. But the level 1 are the Sassoons and the Rothschilds. The royal family play a part. The royal family are full of paedophiles. They go out of their way to pick fellow paedophiles in the Privy Council of the UK, which is why the executive of the judiciary are all paedophiles. And that is how Mandelson was able to bribe and blackmail them to get them to go Jane's way.
So interesting. And you mentioned the Privy Council. We can round this thing out, but it just pops into my head again that Justin Trudeau, who is now openly trying to seize the guns in Canada as he shuts everything down in the name of COVID, he swore his allegiance to the Queen of England and her Privy Council when he was sworn in as Prime Minister. He didn't swear an oath to the people of Canada, but rather to the Queen of England and her Privy Council. What does that tell you, friends? And people to this day, Mark, still believe that the Queen's power in Canada and Australia is just ornamental. They actually believe that to be the case in the UK. Again, this is the matrix in which we live.
I don't think, some say the Queen is at the top. I don't believe so. I believe that the Rothschilds and the Sassoons, they really did take over Britain after the defeat of Napoleon. They rigged the stock market. You can research that for yourself.
That's right.
They were, yeah.
There's a whole film about it. The Rothschilds were very proud of that film that was made featuring a very famous actor at the time, the name of which escapes me, but I did a video about that too. It is called, I believe, House of Rothschild, And it showcases, the whole movie is about exactly what happened during those few days during the end of the Battle of Waterloo, when the Rothschilds knew before the rest of the world did that Napoleon was defeated. And they rigged the market, making it look like Napoleon had won, thereby buying up all of the bonds and assets for pennies on the dollar.
Look at Rothschild. You'd think he was selling apples instead of government bonds.
Bonds are now at 53.
All right. Well, keep on selling till I tell you to stop.
You're creating something like a panic on the exchange, sir.
I know.
Again, that goes back to my Rothschild's Quantified video, in which I mentioned that, and Rothschild bragged about it at that point. He bragged about his wealth after that Battle of Waterloo rigging. It's just unbelievable. And this is the history people don't know, Mark.
So you have liberals keep trying to drum it into the average Englishman, the evils of the British Empire, the evils of the East India Trading Company. But what they don't mention is that was all under the control of the Rothschilds from the 19th century onwards.
Right. Boy, it gets hard to end a conversation like this because it's just so darn interesting. But again, what do we see in the WikiLeaks emails? We see Linda Rothschild and Hillary Clinton being very, very chummy. And who was Hillary Clinton's biggest supporter? Linda Rothschild.
Yeah.
You just can't make this stuff up. So who runs the world? Who runs the world, friends? It's banksters.
Yeah.
Banksters run the world. They always have. And until we throw off their chains, which is getting more and more difficult to do by the day, until we throw off those chains, the bankers will continue to run the world.
The Vatican definitely has some part to play in this, but what is so hard to know is the exact balance of power between all of these players. And I don't really trust anyone who says they know. This stuff is so buried so deep. I don't think these players know themselves who is in charge, but they basically have all the same motivations, the same things to hide, same skeletons in the same closets.
And they have a lot of skeletons in their closets and a lot of blood on their hands. So, I mean, can you imagine the rivers of blood that have flowed because of these unnecessary wars that were manipulated or caused to happen to enrich the bankers into in-debt nation-states? It's just the most important history, and it is the most interesting history, and that's why it's not taught in high schools and colleges, and most people don't know any of this information. Mark, will you tell people how we can follow you or support you?
It's getting very hard to get the word out now. I would like to thank you again, Sean, because right now you are my only publisher. So people might think that there are truth tellers on the internet, on YouTube in particular people who cover the Epstein stuff. None of those people other than yourself covered the Jess Staley files that I sent to Parliament that shows that Jess Staley of Barclays got his power by blackmail. None of them will touch that. Only you and a former friend of mine were willing to publish that materials, and now there is only you publishing this. So my bet is that nobody will follow up on this interview because they're either too scared or they are insiders with their own agenda. But if you want to follow me, it's at Shireman at Twitter or www.shireman.com. I would be glad for any donations from multiple millionaires. I don't ask for anything from anyone with less than many millions. But my finances are struggling, so I've got to swallow my pride. So anything for this fight, but don't donate to me if you've got less than a few million in the bank, please.
Where do people find a way to donate to you?
You can find my contact details if you look hard enough on my website.
And shout out the website again?
www.shireman.com.
You want to spell that?
Let me just bring up the
Shire, is it S-H-I-R-E?
Yeah, there you can see it was on the slide at the bottom.
SHYREMAN.com.
Yeah.
All right.
Old English means sheriff.
Well, Mark, thanks very much. I appreciate it. Guys, our guest has been Mark Anthony Taylor. Mark, I really appreciate your voice. You got a lot of courage, and I do wish you well.
All my courage springs from desperation to survive. I've got to win this lawsuit. As much of the odds are against me, I am by no means finished with it. And by rage, I don't feel depression. I'm not about to have a boating accident. So if I go the way of Epstein or any of these people, you know who's behind it. They're on the top right of this slide. Sir Ian Burnett has the most to gain from my premature demise.
Well, then let's be clear since you brought it up. You're not suicidal, are you, Mark?
No, I want to win against Deutsche Bank. I want to retire in the sun with a lot of money and do good. There is something I should mention here. A few years ago, 2017, I wish I'd mentioned this before, my friend Catherine Frisk, she was my publisher. The last thing she published on the International Reporter.org, which no longer exists, was the expose of the Epstein paedophile ring in Parliament. What it did, it named Epstein and Jess Staley. 2 days after she published that, she ended up dead. I sent a request to the consulate in South Africa asking for a coroner's report. I sent a copy to the judge, Judge Worcester, who was handling the litigation case against Deutsche Bank, in which I'd named Epstein and Staley. I'd sent a copy to my constituency MP. Not one of them bothered to chase that up. I still don't have a coroner's report. So it looks to me that people here on this page had a motive to see my friend was murdered. These people have connections to Israel, Israel's top assassin teams. I strongly believe that those teams were probably involved with the assassination of banksters, quite possibly involved with the assassination of my friend Catherine Frisk. There have been allegations that other people were involved. No, this was if it was a hit, it was a professional assassination. They don't leave this thing to people who are anything other than professional hitmen. So if there was an assassination, it would have been done by this Mossad and these pedophiles and their teams. And these judges, they knew that there was a very strong possibility that was the case. They knew what was being hidden. They knew that Deutsche Bank were involved with bullion laundering. They knew that she was helping to expose all of that. They saw that she'd possibly been done in, and they did absolutely nothing. James Worcester signed off the restraining order that effectively hushed all of this up, kept it out of public view. He hushed up a possible assassination. So please do an investigation into the background of these judges. Dig up everything you can and publish it and send it to me.
All right, friends. You heard it. If there's any anons out there that want to dig into these names and do further research, please have at it. And what's the best way for people to contact you? Is it through the website, or do you want to shout out an email?
On my website, you have my email. You have my full contact address. You can see on that website I am not an anonymous person. I can't be anonymous because I'm running these lawsuits. Right. You know, you can't win a lawsuit and be anonymous and spill the truth. So anyone who's saying I'm CIA, this is totally ridiculous considering what I'm putting out here.
No, right. There's nut jobs out there that are very lazy, and then there are others that I think are paid to put turds in punch bowls to try to infect the whole bowl, to try to get people to not look at this information. That's my view. Guys, our guest has been Mark Anthony Taylor. The website is shireman.com. Mark, thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Sean. That's great.
All right. God bless you. And friends, thanks so much for tuning in. I know this has been a long one, but I think it's so extremely interesting and very, very important. So thank you so much for tuning in, guys. And for real news 24/7, you can visit us at sgtreport.com, which is the antidote to corporate propaganda and Mockingbird mainstream media lies. God bless, guys. Bye-bye.
If you want to launder bullion, the best way to do that is to bury it in a gold mine, then immediately dig it up, put it in the refinery, and it comes up as freshly minted bullion bars that have come out of the gold mine inventory.